The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the mahogany table as Princess Margaret lifted her water glass with deliberate precision. To any observer, she appeared to be simply taking a sip during the 1963 state dinner honoring President Kennedy. But, the butler standing near the door immediately understood the signal. Within moments, he had discreetly informed the kitchen staff to delay the next course by exactly 7 minutes. This wasn't coincidence. This was the royal family's secret language in action. Lady Catherine Pemberton had been watching royal dining rituals for 37 years as the palace's chief protocol officer. She understood that every gesture, every placement of silverware, every seemingly casual touch of a napkin carried meaning that could influence international relations. What she witnessed that evening would later be documented in her private journals as one of the most sophisticated displays of silent communication she had ever observed. The tradition began in 1837 when Queen Victoria first realized the power of unspoken messages during formal meals. As a young monarch facing skeptical European leaders, she needed ways to communicate with her advisors without appearing weak or uncertain. The solution came from an unexpected source, her German governess, who taught her that royal courts across Europe had been using subtle dining signals for centuries. Victoria's first major test came during a dinner with Russian Ambassador Count Nesselrode in 1839. Tensions were high over British interests in Afghanistan, and the slightest diplomatic misstep could have led to serious consequences. As the ambassador spoke about Russian expansion, Victoria carefully adjusted her fork to rest at a specific angle on her plate. Her private secretary, Lord Melbourne, immediately recognized the signal. It meant, continue listening, but prepare our strongest response. The conversation that followed would establish British dominance in the region for decades. But none of the other guests realized that the entire negotiation had been choreographed through silent signals that began with the placement of a silver fork. By the 1850s, Victoria had developed an entire system of dining communications. A water glass moved slightly to the right meant agree with the current speaker. Placing a napkin on the left side of the plate signaled change the subject immediately. Touching the rim of a wine glass indicated this person is not to be trusted. These signals were taught only to the most trusted palace staff and immediate family members. The system became so sophisticated that visiting dignitaries often left state dinners completely unaware that they had been manipulated through carefully orchestrated silent communication. Prince Albert, Victoria's husband, became particularly skilled at reading and responding to these signals. Their partnership at formal dinners was legendary among those who understood what was really happening. In 1854, during the Crimean War crisis, a single dining signal may have prevented a much larger European conflict. The French ambassador had arrived at Windsor Castle with demands that could have forced Britain into an impossible position. As he presented his government's ultimatum during the main course, Queen Victoria slowly rotated her wineglass one complete turn clockwise. The signal was immediately understood by Foreign Secretary Lord Clarendon, who was seated across the table. It meant, this conversation ends now. Begin emergency protocol. Within minutes, Clarendon had smoothly redirected the conversation to safer topics, while Victoria's private signals to other British officials initiated a diplomatic response that would defuse the crisis within hours. The French ambassador left believing he had attended a pleasant social dinner. He never realized that his ultimatum had been effectively neutralized before he finished speaking it. Prince Edward, later King Edward VII, learned these signals as a child but expanded them considerably when he became heir apparent. His additions included specific gestures for military matters, economic negotiations, and social situations. By the 1870s, the royal signal system included over 200 distinct communications, each precisely defined and regularly practiced by family members. Edward's most famous use of dining signals occurred in 1875 during negotiations with German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. The Iron Chancellor was known for his intimidating presence and skilled negotiating tactics. But he had never encountered anything like the silent coordination he faced across the dinner table at Buckingham Palace. As Bismarck attempted to pressure Britain into a disadvantageous trade agreement, Edward employed a series of signals that coordinated responses from multiple British officials simultaneously. A slight adjustment of his knife signaled the Treasury Secretary to mention specific economic data. Touching his napkin corner prompted the Foreign Secretary to reference particular military intelligence. Moving his bread plate indicated that the conversation should shift to colonial matters where Britain held stronger cards. Bismarck, despite his reputation for diplomatic cunning, found himself constantly off balance as the British side anticipated his every move and responded with perfectly timed coordination. The final agreement heavily favored British interests, leaving the German Chancellor puzzled about how such experienced negotiators had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered. Years later, Bismarck would write in his memoirs about the supernatural coordination he had witnessed at that dinner, never knowing that he had been facing a communication system that had been refined over decades. The dining signals evolved with each generation of the royal family. Queen Alexandra, Edward's wife, contributed signals specifically designed for managing social situations and personal relationships. She developed subtle ways to indicate approval or disapproval of potential marriages, business partnerships, and social connections that affected the royal family's interests. King George V, who ruled during World War I, added military signals that proved crucial during wartime dinners with Allied leaders. These included ways to communicate troop movements, supply needs, and strategic plans without ever speaking directly about military matters. The system became so valuable that a special team of palace staff was assigned to ensure its security. The most dramatic use of dining signals during George V's reign occurred in 1917 during a dinner with French General Ferdinand Foch. British and French forces were struggling with coordination on the Western Front, and political tensions threatened the alliance. As Foch presented his demands for British troop commitments, King George V used a series of signals to coordinate responses with British military leaders present at the dinner. A water glass moved 2 inches to the left indicated specific troop numbers that Britain could commit. Adjusting his watch chain signaled agreement to particular strategic objectives. When he placed his knife and fork in a precise parallel position, it meant that Britain would support French plans but expected equivalent commitments in return. The resulting agreement, hammered out entirely through silent communication during a 7-course dinner, would lead to the successful Allied offensive that helped end the war. General Foch left the dinner believing he had participated in the most efficient military planning session of his career, never suspecting that the entire conversation had been conducted in a secret language that surrounded the spoken words. By the 1920s, the royal dining signals had become so sophisticated that palace staff required months of training to properly understand and respond to them. New servants were given detailed instruction manuals that were kept under strict security protocols. The manual included precise drawings showing proper silverware positions, hand gestures, and timing requirements for each signal. King George VI inherited this system and used it extensively during World War II. His dining signals with Winston Churchill became legendary among the small group of people who understood what was happening. During the darkest days of the war, when London was under constant bombardment, formal dinners continued at Buckingham Palace with crucial strategic decisions being made through silent communication that could not be intercepted by enemy intelligence. The most significant wartime use of dining signals occurred in 1943 during a dinner with American General Dwight Eisenhower. Plans for the D-Day invasion were being finalized, and absolute secrecy was essential. As Eisenhower discussed general strategic concepts, King George VI used dining signals to communicate specific British contributions to the invasion plan. Moving his soup spoon to a particular position indicated the number of British divisions that would participate. Adjusting his napkin fold signaled approval for particular landing sites. When he touched the base of his wineglass, it meant that British intelligence had confirmed crucial information about German defenses. The conversation appeared to casual observers as a social dinner between Allied leaders. In reality, it was a high-level strategic planning session conducted entirely through signals that had been developed and refined over more than a century. The success of the D-Day invasion owed at least partial credit to decisions made that evening through silent royal communication. Princess Elizabeth, the future Queen Elizabeth II, began learning the dining signal system when she was 12 years old. Her training was intensive and thorough, as palace officials recognized that she would need to use these skills throughout a lifetime of royal duties. She proved to be an exceptionally quick learner, mastering advanced signals within months of beginning her instruction. Her first major use of the signals came in 1947 during her engagement dinner with Prince Philip. The event was carefully watched by representatives from multiple European royal families, each with their own interests in the match. Through subtle dining signals with her parents, Elizabeth managed to navigate complex social and political pressures while maintaining the appearance of a normal family celebration. A slight adjustment of her engagement ring signaled her comfort with particular conversation topics. The way she held her fork indicated her approval of specific guests' comments about the upcoming marriage. When she placed her water glass in a precise position relative to her plate, it communicated her desire to change the subject away from sensitive political matters. The evening was considered a tremendous diplomatic success, with all attending representatives leaving satisfied that the marriage would benefit their own interests. Years later, several attendees would comment on the remarkable grace and political sophistication that the young princess had displayed that evening. When Elizabeth became queen in 1952, she inherited not just the throne but also the most sophisticated system of silent communication ever developed by any royal family. Her coronation dinner included representatives from dozens of nations, each watching for any sign of the new queen's political inclinations and diplomatic priorities. The dinner became a masterpiece of silent communication as Queen Elizabeth II used the traditional signals to coordinate with British officials while simultaneously sending carefully crafted messages to foreign representatives. A particular way of holding her scepter during the meal indicated Britain's commitment to the Commonwealth. The angle at which she placed her crown nearby signaled her approach to Cold War politics. By the end of the evening, every major world leader had received clear communication about the new queen's political direction, yet no words had been spoken about any controversial topics. The dinner conversation had focused entirely on ceremonial matters and social pleasantries, while the real diplomatic work occurred through signals that had been perfected over generations. The success of Elizabeth II's coronation dinner established her reputation as a skilled diplomat before she had been queen for even a full year. Foreign leaders who attended would spend decades trying to understand how they had received such clear communication about British policy without any direct political conversation taking place. The 1960s brought new challenges that required expanding the traditional dining signal system. As television coverage of royal events became common, the family needed ways to communicate that would not be detected by cameras or lip-reading experts. The solution came from Queen Elizabeth II herself, who developed what palace insiders called microsignals, movements so subtle they appeared completely natural to television audiences. Prince Charles began learning these enhanced signals when he was 16. His training included not only the traditional system but also new techniques designed specifically for the television age. Palace instructors used video recordings to help him perfect movements that would be invisible to cameras while remaining clear to trained observers in the room. The first major test of these television-era signals came during Prince Charles's 21st birthday celebration in 1969. The event was broadcast live to millions of viewers worldwide, making traditional dining signals impossible to use. Instead, the royal family employed the new microsignal system throughout the evening. When Queen Elizabeth II touched her pearl necklace briefly while speaking to the Canadian Prime Minister, she was actually communicating approval for a proposed trade agreement that had been discussed privately earlier that day. The gesture appeared completely natural to television viewers, but the Prime Minister immediately understood that Britain supported the proposal. Prince Philip's contribution to the signal system proved equally valuable during this period. His background in naval communications helped him develop timing-based signals that used the natural rhythm of formal dinners to convey complex information. A pause of precisely 3 seconds before reaching for a water glass could indicate agreement with a proposed timeline. Completing a bite of food before responding to a question might signal the need for additional consultation. The most sophisticated use of Philip's timing signals occurred in 1971 during a state dinner with President Nixon. Relations between Britain and the United States were complicated by disagreements over Vietnam War policy, and both sides needed to communicate their positions without making public statements that might upset their respective domestic audiences. As Nixon discussed his administration's foreign policy goals, Prince Philip used carefully timed eating patterns to signal British responses. Finishing his soup before Nixon indicated agreement with certain objectives. Pausing halfway through the main course while Nixon spoke signaled areas where Britain had concerns. When Philip placed his fork down at a precise moment during Nixon's comments about Southeast Asia, it communicated that Britain would not publicly oppose American policy but would not provide direct support either. The dinner ended with both sides having clear understanding of each other's positions, despite never having discussed Vietnam directly. Nixon's staff later credited the dinner with preventing several diplomatic incidents that could have damaged the crucial Anglo-American relationship. Princess Anne brought her own innovations to the dining signal system when she began attending state functions in the early 1970s. Her athletic background and competitive nature led her to develop what she called action signals, movements that incorporated the natural gestures of eating into more dynamic communication patterns. Anne's signals often involved the direction and speed of her movements rather than static positions. Cutting meat with particular knife angles could indicate the urgency of different diplomatic matters. The way she lifted her water glass might signal whether a topic required immediate attention or could be addressed through normal channels. Her most famous use of these action signals occurred during a 1974 dinner with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin. Cold War tensions were high, and any miscommunication could have serious consequences. As Dobrynin probed British positions on various international issues, Princess Anne used her movement-based signals to help coordinate British responses. When she cut her roast beef with quick, precise strokes, it indicated that Britain viewed Soviet actions in a particular region as provocative and requiring strong response. Slower, more deliberate cutting suggested areas where compromise might be possible. The way she moved her fork from plate to mouth communicated the intensity of British concerns about different Soviet policies. Dobrynin, despite his experience with diplomatic subtlety, found himself dealing with responses that seemed to anticipate his questions and address his concerns before he fully articulated them. The dinner achieved more substantive communication about East-West relations than months of formal diplomatic exchanges had accomplished. The 1980s brought new complexity as Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher began attending more royal dinners in her capacity as head of government. Thatcher was known for her direct communication style, which initially clashed with the subtle approach required for dining signals. However, she proved to be a surprisingly quick student of the system. Queen Elizabeth II personally trained Thatcher in the basics of dining signal communication, recognizing that coordination between the monarchy and government was essential for effective diplomacy. The lessons took place during private dinners at Buckingham Palace, with only the most trusted palace staff present. Thatcher's first successful use of dining signals came during a 1982 dinner with French President François Mitterrand shortly after the Falklands War. The dinner was intended to repair relations between Britain and France, which had been strained by French arms sales to Argentina during the conflict. As Mitterrand attempted to explain French policy during the war, Thatcher used dining signals learned from the Queen to coordinate with Foreign Secretary Francis Pym and other British officials present. A particular way of holding her wineglass indicated that Britain was willing to move past the disagreement but expected specific commitments from France regarding future arms sales. When Thatcher placed her napkin at a precise angle next to her plate, it signaled that Britain would consider increased cooperation with France on European defense matters. The positioning of her silverware during Mitterrand's comments about NATO policy communicated British conditions for that cooperation. The dinner successfully rebuilt Anglo-French relations and led to increased military cooperation that continued for decades. Mitterrand later commented to aides about Thatcher's unexpected diplomatic sophistication, never realizing that her effectiveness had been enhanced by a communication system that predated both their careers. Prince Andrew and Prince Edward learned the dining signal system as children, but their instruction included new elements designed for international travel and informal diplomatic settings. As younger members of the royal family, they often attended events where the traditional formal structure of palace dinners was not available. Prince Andrew's military service in the Falklands War made him particularly valuable for dinners involving military leaders from various nations. He developed specialized signals for communicating about defense matters, troop capabilities, and strategic assessments that could be used during informal meals with foreign military officials. The most significant use of Andrew's military-focused signals occurred during a 1985 dinner with NATO commanders during a period of increased Cold War tensions. The dinner was technically social, but all attendees understood that important strategic discussions were taking place beneath the surface conversation. When Andrew adjusted his military decorations during particular parts of the conversation, it signaled British assessment of Soviet military capabilities in different theaters. The way he handled his knife and fork indicated British willingness to commit resources to various NATO contingency plans. A specific gesture of touching his water glass communicated British intelligence conclusions about Soviet intentions in Eastern Europe. The dinner resulted in coordinated NATO responses to Soviet military exercises that helped prevent potential miscalculations that could have led to actual conflict. Military historians would later identify this dinner as a crucial moment in maintaining alliance unity during one of the most dangerous periods of the Cold War. Prince Edward's contribution to the signal system focused on economic and cultural diplomacy. His involvement with arts organizations and business ventures gave him expertise in areas that were becoming increasingly important for British international relations. Edward developed signals specifically for communicating about trade relationships, cultural exchanges, and economic partnerships. These proved particularly valuable during dinners with leaders from developing nations where economic cooperation was often more important than traditional military or political alliances. His most effective use of these economic signals came during a 1987 dinner with several African heads of state who were visiting London for Commonwealth meetings. The dinner occurred during a period when Britain was trying to balance its interests in southern Africa with international pressure regarding apartheid in South Africa.
As the African leaders discussed their concerns about British economic relationships with South Africa, Prince Edward used his specialized signals to communicate nuanced British positions.
The way he arranged his bread and butter indicated areas where Britain was willing to modify its economic policies. Specific movements of his soup spoon signaled British commitments to increased aid and investment in other African nations. The subtle communication during the dinner helped Britain maintain important African relationships while gradually adjusting its South African policies in response to international pressure. Several African leaders later credited Edward with helping them understand British positions that were too sensitive to communicate through normal diplomatic channels. Princess Diana's introduction to the dining signal system in the early 1980s brought new challenges and opportunities. Her natural grace and attention to detail made her an excellent student of the traditional signals, but her genuine warmth and emotional responses sometimes conflicted with the careful control required for effective silent communication. Queen Elizabeth II recognized that Diana's popularity and media attention made her dining behavior particularly important for royal diplomacy. Special instruction sessions were arranged to help Diana master not only the basic signals but also the emotional discipline required to use them effectively while maintaining her authentic public persona. Diana's breakthrough moment came during a 1983 dinner with President Reagan and First Lady Nancy Reagan. The dinner was crucial for maintaining the special relationship between Britain and the United States during a period when both nations were dealing with complex international challenges. As the conversation touched on sensitive topics including British concerns about American policy in Central America, Diana used dining signals to help coordinate British responses while simultaneously charming the American guests with her natural personality. Her ability to maintain warm social interaction while participating in sophisticated diplomatic communication impressed even experienced palace officials. When Diana placed her wine glass at a specific position relative to her plate, it indicated British willingness to support certain American initiatives. The way she folded her napkin during discussion of Caribbean policies signaled areas where Britain had concerns that needed to be addressed privately. The dinner strengthened personal relationships between the two first families while also advancing important diplomatic objectives. Reagan later told aides that he had been impressed by the sophistication and unity of the British team, never suspecting that much of their coordination had been achieved through signals that Diana had mastered despite being relatively new to royal duties. The success of Diana's performance at the Reagan dinner established her as a valuable asset for royal diplomacy. Palace officials began incorporating her into the planning for major state dinners, recognizing that her combination of popular appeal and diplomatic skill could advance British interests in ways that traditional diplomatic approaches could not achieve. However, Diana's emotional nature also created new risks for the dining signal system. Her genuine reactions to certain topics or personalities sometimes interfered with the calculated responses required for effective diplomatic communication. Palace protocol officers had to develop new strategies for managing these situations while preserving both diplomatic effectiveness and Diana's authentic public image. The solution came through what insiders called hybrid signaling, a modified approach that allowed Diana to express authentic emotions while still participating in coordinated diplomatic communication. This involved giving her specific roles in dinner conversations that aligned with her natural interests and reactions, while other family members handled more sensitive diplomatic messaging. This hybrid approach proved successful during a series of dinners with Middle Eastern leaders in the mid-1980s. Diana's genuine interest in humanitarian issues allowed her to engage authentically with guests, while her carefully trained use of dining signals helped communicate British positions on complex political matters. The combination of authentic emotion and sophisticated communication created a uniquely effective form of royal diplomacy that influenced British foreign relations throughout the 1980s. Foreign leaders often left dinners feeling that they had experienced both genuine personal connection and clear diplomatic communication, though they rarely understood the systematic approach that had created both impressions. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 created entirely new diplomatic challenges that required adapting the royal dining signal system for a changing world order. Queen Elizabeth II recognized that the traditional Cold War signals needed updating to address relationships with emerging democracies, economic partnerships with former communist nations, and the complex dynamics of a multipolar world. Palace protocol experts spent months developing new signal categories specifically for post-Cold War diplomacy. These included communications for economic transitions, democratization support, and cultural exchanges that had been impossible during the previous decades of East-West division. The first major test of these adapted signals came during a 1992 dinner with Russian President Boris Yeltsin. The event was historically significant as the first time a Russian head of state had dined formally with the British royal family since before the Russian Revolution. The potential for miscommunication was enormous, as both sides were still learning how to interact without the framework of ideological opposition that had defined their relationship for 70 years. Queen Elizabeth II used the new post-Cold War signals throughout the dinner to communicate British support for Russian democratic reforms while also indicating concerns about political stability and economic chaos. When she adjusted her tiara slightly while Yeltsin discussed economic policy, it signaled British willingness to support international aid packages for Russia. Prince Philip employed timing-based signals to indicate British positions on various former Soviet republics that were seeking independence. A pause of specific duration before responding to questions about the Baltic states communicated British recognition policies. The way he held his wine glass during discussions of Ukraine signaled British concerns about potential Russian interference in that nation's independence process. The dinner successfully established a foundation for Anglo-Russian relations that avoided the suspicions and misunderstandings that had characterized earlier diplomatic contacts. Yeltsin later told his advisers that he had been impressed by British understanding of Russian challenges, never knowing that much of this understanding had been communicated through signals that enabled the British side to address his concerns before he fully expressed them. Princess Margaret's declining health during the 1990s led to increased responsibilities for other family members in maintaining the dining signal system. Prince Charles, now in his 40s, had become expert in all aspects of the communication methods and began training his own sons in the basic principles. Prince William started learning dining signals when he was 12 years old, beginning with simple position-based communications and gradually advancing to more complex timing and movement patterns. His instruction included not only traditional royal protocols but also new elements designed for the media-intensive environment of modern royalty. Prince Harry's training began 2 years later but proved more challenging due to his naturally impulsive personality and tendency toward direct communication. Palace instructors had to develop modified teaching methods that channeled his energy into effective signal usage rather than trying to suppress his natural tendencies entirely. The brothers' first opportunity to observe professional-level dining signal communication came during a 1995 dinner with President Nelson Mandela of South Africa. The dinner was emotionally significant for the royal family, as it represented Britain's full acceptance of post-apartheid South Africa after years of complicated relationships due to apartheid policies. As Mandela discussed his vision for South Africa's future, Queen Elizabeth II used dining signals to coordinate British responses that balanced acknowledgement of past British policy errors with commitments to future cooperation. When she moved her water glass to a specific position, it indicated British willingness to increase aid for education and healthcare in South Africa. Prince Charles employed specialized signals to communicate about trade relationships and investment opportunities. The way he arranged his silverware during Mandela's comments about economic development signaled British business community interest in South African partnerships. The dinner resulted in dramatically improved Anglo-South African relations and increased British investment in South Africa's democratic transition. Mandela later credited the dinner with helping him understand British commitment to supporting African democracy, though he never suspected that much of this commitment had been communicated through centuries-old signal techniques adapted for modern diplomatic challenges. The death of Princess Diana in 1997 created both emotional trauma for the royal family and practical challenges for maintaining the dining signal system. Diana had become skilled at using the signals in ways that combined diplomatic effectiveness with her authentic emotional engagement, and her loss removed a unique asset from royal diplomatic capabilities. The period following Diana's death saw increased emphasis on training other family members to fill the gap her absence had created. The Duchess of York, despite her separation from Prince Andrew, was asked to participate in signal training to help maintain capabilities for informal diplomatic functions. More significantly, increased attention focused on Princess Anne, whose direct personality and extensive international experience made her particularly valuable for certain types of diplomatic communication. Her writing and competitive background had given her exceptional body control and timing sense, which translated effectively into sophisticated signal usage. Anne's enhanced role in royal diplomacy was demonstrated during a 1998 dinner with Chinese Premier Zhu Rongji. The dinner occurred during sensitive negotiations about Hong Kong's transition to Chinese sovereignty, and any diplomatic mistakes could have affected the welfare of millions of Hong Kong residents. Princess Anne used her action-based signals to communicate British positions on human rights, economic freedoms, and legal protections that were crucial for Hong Kong's future. The speed and direction of her movements while eating indicated the intensity of British concerns about different aspects of Chinese policy in Hong Kong. Wen and cut her meat with particularly precise, controlled movements during Zhu's comments about Hong Kong's autonomy. It signaled that Britain was watching Chinese actions very carefully and expected full compliance with agreed-upon protections for Hong Kong residents. The dinner contributed to Chinese commitments that helped preserve Hong Kong's special status during its early years under Chinese sovereignty. British diplomats later credited the dinner with establishing personal relationships between Chinese and British leaders that facilitated ongoing cooperation on Hong Kong issues. The approach of the new millennium brought technological challenges to the royal dining signal system that had not been anticipated by its creators. Digital photography, enhanced television coverage, and internet communication meant that royal dining behavior was being observed and analyzed by audiences far beyond the trained diplomatic community. Palace communications experts had to develop new strategies for maintaining signal effectiveness while preventing discovery by hostile intelligence services or overly curious media organizations. This led to the development of what insiders called layered signaling, communication methods that appeared completely innocent to casual observers while remaining clear to intended recipients. The layered approach used natural variations in dining behavior to mask deliberate signals. Movements that might normally indicate specific diplomatic positions were disguised within broader patterns of behavior that appeared to be simply personal preferences or responses to the food and conversation. Queen Elizabeth II's mastery of layered signaling was demonstrated during the 1999 state banquet for Chinese President Jiang Zemin. The dinner occurred during a period of increased tensions over human rights issues, trade disputes, and concerns about Chinese military modernization. Throughout the evening, the Queen used layered signals that appeared to television audiences as nothing more than the natural behavior of an elderly lady enjoying dinner with guests. However, British diplomatic officials present understood that she was conducting a complex negotiation about trade relationships, human rights concerns, and security cooperation. When the Queen paused to admire a particular piece of china during Jiang's comments about Taiwan policy, casual observers saw simply an elderly woman appreciating beautiful objects. British officials understood that she was signaling concern about Chinese military posturing and the need for peaceful resolution of cross-strait issues. The dinner achieved significant diplomatic progress on several sensitive issues while maintaining the appearance of purely social interaction. Chinese officials left with clear understanding of British positions and concerns, though they had no awareness of the communication system that had enabled such precise diplomatic messaging. Prince Charles's marriage to Camilla Parker Bowles in 2005 required integrating a new person into the dining signal system while managing the complex public emotions surrounding the relationship. Camilla's training in royal dining signals was particularly challenging because of the intense public scrutiny her every action received. Palace protocol experts developed a careful introduction program that taught Camilla the basic signals while emphasizing the importance of maintaining her authentic personality. Her natural grace and social intelligence made her a capable student, though her tendency toward spontaneous warmth sometimes conflicted with the calculated precision required for diplomatic signaling. Camilla's first major use of dining signals came during a 2006 dinner with several European heads of state during a period when Britain was negotiating complex European Union relationships. Her role was carefully designed to complement Charles's more formal diplomatic communications while adding a personal warmth that would facilitate relationship building. When Camilla touched her wedding ring briefly while listening to the German Chancellor discuss EU budget negotiations, it signaled British flexibility on certain financial issues. The way she held her wineglass during conversations about energy policy indicated British interest in increased European cooperation on renewable energy development. The dinner successfully advanced British interests in European negotiations while establishing Camilla as a valuable asset for royal diplomacy. Foreign leaders appreciated her combination of intelligence and warmth, never suspecting that her natural social skills were being enhanced by sophisticated communication techniques developed over centuries. Prince William's marriage to Catherine Middleton in 2011 brought similar challenges and opportunities. Catherine's middle-class background meant she had no previous exposure to royal dining protocols, requiring extensive training in both basic etiquette and advanced signal communication. Her instruction was particularly thorough because palace officials recognized that she would eventually become queen and would need to use these skills throughout a lifetime of royal duties. Catherine proved to be an exceptional student, combining natural intelligence with strong determination to master even the most complex signal sequences. Catherine's breakthrough performance came during a 2012 dinner with President Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama. The dinner was crucial for maintaining the special relationship between Britain and the United States during a period of changing global dynamics and American strategic priorities. As conversation touched on various international challenges including Middle Eastern conflicts and Asian security issues, Catherine used dining signals to help coordinate British responses while simultaneously building personal relationships with the American First Family. Her ability to balance diplomatic communication with authentic emotional connection impressed experienced palace officials who had worked with multiple generations of royalty. When Catherine adjusted her engagement ring during Obama's comments about Afghanistan policy, it signaled British positions on troop withdrawal timelines. The way she arranged her napkin while discussing educational initiatives indicated areas where Britain and America could increase cooperation on international development projects. The dinner strengthened both official diplomatic relationships and personal connections between the two families. Obama later told aides that he had been impressed by the sophistication and unity of the British royal approach to international issues, never knowing that much of this effectiveness resulted from communication techniques that had been refined over more than a century. Prince Harry's military service in Afghanistan provided him with unique credibility for dinners involving military leaders and veterans organizations. His combat experience, combined with his mastery of royal dining signals, made him particularly effective for communications about defense cooperation, veterans affairs, and military alliance relationships. Harry's most significant use of military-focused dining signals occurred during a 2013 dinner with American military leaders who were visiting London for NATO strategic planning sessions. The dinner provided an opportunity for informal communication about sensitive military matters that could not be addressed through formal diplomatic channels. When Harry adjusted his military decorations during discussions of Afghan withdrawal plans, it communicated British assessments of different timeline options. The way he handled his silverware during conversations about future NATO missions signaled British willingness to participate in various alliance activities. The dinner facilitated military cooperation agreements that strengthened Anglo-American defense relationships for years afterward. American military leaders credited the dinner with establishing personal trust that enabled more effective formal cooperation on sensitive defense matters. The birth of Prince George in 2013 began a new generation of royal family members who would eventually need training in the dining signal system. Palace officials began preliminary planning for instruction programs that would prepare the next generation for the diplomatic responsibilities they would inherit. However, the changing nature of international relations and communication technology meant that future signal systems would need to be significantly different from traditional approaches. Social media, instant global communication, and increased transparency in government operations were creating an environment where the subtle, hidden communications that had been effective for previous generations might be less viable. Palace strategic planners began developing new approaches to royal diplomatic communication that would preserve the essential coordination capabilities of the traditional signal system while adapting to modern requirements for transparency and authentic engagement with global audiences. The 2016 Brexit referendum created unprecedented challenges for royal dining signal communication. Queen Elizabeth II, as constitutional monarch, could not publicly express political opinions about European Union membership, yet she needed to communicate with government officials and foreign leaders about the implications of Britain's changing relationship with Europe. The solution required developing entirely new categories of signals that could address complex constitutional and political issues without violating the monarchy's traditional neutrality. Palace protocol experts worked with constitutional lawyers to create communication methods that would enable necessary coordination while maintaining proper royal behavior. The first major test of these Brexit-era signals came during a 2017 dinner with German Chancellor Angela Merkel shortly after Article 50 had been triggered to begin the formal Brexit process. The dinner was watched closely by European leaders seeking to understand the royal family's perspective on Britain's departure from the European Union. Queen Elizabeth II used the new constitutional signals throughout the evening to communicate respect for the democratic decision while indicating royal commitment to maintaining strong European relationships. When she touched her brooch briefly during Merkel's comments about trade relationships, it signaled that the monarchy supported continued economic cooperation despite political separation. Prince Philip employed specially developed timing signals to indicate British positions on various aspects of the Brexit negotiations. A pause of precise duration before responding to questions about citizens' rights communicated British commitments to protecting EU nationals living in the UK. The dinner successfully maintained Anglo-German relationships during a period of significant political uncertainty. Merkel later told EU colleagues that she had gained confidence about British commitment to orderly separation and continued cooperation, though she remained unaware of the sophisticated communication system that had provided such clear reassurance. Prince William and Catherine's growing international profile during this period made their mastery of dining signals increasingly important for British diplomacy. Their youth and modern approach to royal duties appealed to younger foreign leaders, while their command of traditional signal techniques enabled sophisticated diplomatic communication. Their most significant performance came during a 2018 dinner with French President Emmanuel Macron and his wife Brigitte. The dinner occurred during crucial Brexit negotiations when Anglo-French cooperation was essential for achieving orderly separation from the European Union. William used modernized versions of traditional signals to communicate about trade relationships, defense cooperation, and cultural exchanges that would continue after Brexit. When he adjusted his cufflinks during Macron's comments about financial services, it signaled British positions on maintaining London's role as a European financial centre. Catherine employed her own specialized signals to indicate British commitment to continued cooperation on educational exchanges, cultural programs, and humanitarian initiatives. The way she held her wineglass during discussions of climate change policy communicated British willingness to work with France on environmental issues despite Brexit complications. The dinner contributed to maintaining Franco-British cooperation during the Brexit process and established personal relationships that facilitated ongoing collaboration on various international issues. Macron later credited the dinner with helping him understand British intentions and commitments beyond the immediate political challenges of Brexit negotiations. Prince Harry's marriage to Meghan Markle in 2018 created unique opportunities and challenges for royal dining signal communication. Meghan's American background and acting experience gave her natural skills for controlled public performance, but her lack of aristocratic training required intensive instruction in royal protocols. More significantly, Meghan's mixed-race heritage and American citizenship created new diplomatic possibilities for British international relations, particularly with Commonwealth nations and American allies. Palace officials recognized that her effective use of dining signals could advance British interests in ways that had been previously impossible. Meghan's training in royal dining signals was comprehensive but had to be completed quickly due to the intense international attention her relationship with Harry generated. Her acting background helped her master the performance aspects of signal communication, while her intelligence and political awareness enabled her to understand the diplomatic implications of different signal choices. Her first major use of dining signals came during a 2018 dinner with several Commonwealth heads of government during a period when some member nations were questioning their continued participation in the organization. Meghan's presence at the dinner sent powerful messages about the Commonwealth's inclusive future, while her use of dining signals enabled sophisticated diplomatic communication. When Meghan adjusted her bracelet during discussions of economic development in Caribbean nations, it signaled British commitment to increased investment and aid programs. The way she arranged her silverware while listening to African leaders discuss trade relationships indicated British flexibility on various economic partnership proposals. The dinner successfully strengthened Commonwealth relationships and demonstrated the organization's relevance for addressing modern global challenges. Several Commonwealth leaders later credited the dinner with revitalizing their nation's commitment to the organization, though they had no awareness of the systematic approach that had enhanced Meghan's natural diplomatic abilities. However, Meghan's American directness and tendency toward emotional authenticity sometimes conflicted with the careful control required for effective signal usage. Palace instructors had to develop modified training approaches that channeled her natural communication strengths into effective diplomatic signaling without suppressing the personality traits that made her valuable for British international relations. The solution involved creating authentic signaling techniques that allowed Meghan to express genuine emotions and reactions while still participating in coordinated diplomatic communication. This required other family members to adjust their own signal usage to complement Meghan's more direct communication style. This hybrid approach proved successful during a series of dinners with African leaders in 2019. Meghan's genuine passion for humanitarian issues, combined with her trained use of dining signals, created uniquely effective diplomatic communication that advanced British interests while building strong personal relationships with foreign leaders. Prince Charles's increasing role as heir apparent during this period required expanding his mastery of dining signals to address his future responsibilities as monarch. His training included not only traditional diplomatic communication but also constitutional signals that would be necessary for his eventual role as head of state. Charles's most sophisticated use of enhanced dining signals came during a 2019 dinner with President Trump during the American leader's state visit to Britain. The dinner was politically sensitive because of Trump's controversial statements about various international issues and his criticism of some British policies. Charles used constitutional-level signals throughout the evening to communicate British positions on climate change, international cooperation, and alliance relationships while maintaining the political neutrality required of the royal family. When he adjusted his signet ring during Trump's comments about NATO funding, it signaled British commitment to alliance obligations while indicating concerns about American approaches to burden sharing. The way Charles held his fork during discussions of trade relationships communicated British interest in increased Anglo-American economic cooperation while also indicating areas where British and American interests might conflict. His timing in reaching for his water glass during Trump's comments about international agreements signaled British commitment to multilateral cooperation. The dinner successfully maintained Anglo-American relationships while enabling Charles to communicate important British positions on various international issues. Trump later told aides that he had been impressed by Charles's knowledge and sophistication regarding international affairs, never suspecting that much of this effectiveness resulted from signal techniques that enabled Charles to address American concerns while maintaining royal constitutional proprieties. The COVID-19 pandemic beginning in 2020 created entirely new challenges for royal dining signal communication. Social distancing requirements, travel restrictions, and health protocols meant that traditional formal dinners were impossible for extended periods, forcing the development of new communication methods adapted for virtual meetings and modified social interactions. Palace technology experts worked with protocol officers to develop digital dining signals that could be used during video conferences with foreign leaders. These adapted techniques used camera positioning, background elements, and timing patterns that could communicate diplomatic messages through virtual meetings. Queen Elizabeth II's first use of digital dining signals came during a 2020 video conference with G7 leaders during the early months of the pandemic. The meeting was crucial for coordinating international responses to the health crisis and economic challenges created by lockdown policies. Using carefully positioned objects on her desk and precisely timed movements that appeared natural to video cameras, the Queen communicated British positions on vaccine development cooperation, economic support measures, and travel restriction policies. Her arrangement of papers and books signaled British commitments to various international cooperation initiatives. The virtual meeting successfully maintained British influence in international COVID response coordination despite the limitations imposed by remote communication. Foreign leaders credited the meeting with establishing coordination frameworks that proved crucial for global pandemic response efforts. Prince William and Catherine's adaptation to digital communication during the pandemic demonstrated their mastery of modified signal techniques. Their video conferences with foreign leaders and international organizations used background elements, clothing choices, and movement patterns that maintained diplomatic communication capabilities despite technological constraints. Their most effective use of digital dining signals occurred during a 2021 virtual meeting with climate activists and government officials from multiple nations during preparation for the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow. The meeting required coordinating complex international negotiations while maintaining public appearance of environmental leadership. William and Catherine used their virtual meeting setup to communicate British positions on various climate initiatives while building coalition support for summit objectives. Strategic placement of environmental books and artwork signaled British priorities for different climate policies. Timing patterns in their responses to questions indicated areas where Britain was willing to make commitments versus topics requiring further negotiation. The virtual coordination contributed to the eventual success of the Glasgow Climate Summit and established Britain as a leader in international environmental cooperation. International environmental leaders credited William and Catherine's engagement with building the personal relationships and trust that enabled complex multilateral negotiations. Prince Harry and Meghan's departure from royal duties in 2020 created both challenges and opportunities for the dining signal system. Their departure reduced the number of family members available for diplomatic functions, but it also eliminated some of the tensions that had complicated signal coordination during their final years as working royals. The remaining active royals had to expand their capabilities to compensate for Harry and Meghan's absence, leading to enhanced training programs for other family members. Princess Anne took on increased responsibilities for Commonwealth relationships, while Prince Edward expanded his role in European diplomatic functions. More significantly, the departure enabled the development of more cohesive signal coordination among the remaining working royals. Without the complications created by Harry and Meghan's different communication styles and priorities, the other family members could return to more traditional signal approaches while adapting them for modern diplomatic challenges. The death of Prince Philip in 2021 represented the loss of one of the most skilled practitioners of royal dining signal communication. His naval background and decades of diplomatic experience had made him particularly effective at timing-based signals and military-related communications. Philip's final major use of dining signals occurred during a 2020 virtual meeting with Commonwealth military leaders during the early months of the pandemic. Despite his advanced age and declining health, he successfully used adapted digital signals to communicate about defense cooperation and military support for civilian authorities during the health crisis. The meeting established coordination frameworks that proved crucial for Commonwealth military cooperation throughout the pandemic period. Military leaders from multiple nations later credited Philip's participation with providing strategic guidance that enhanced their nation's pandemic response capabilities. His death required redistributing his signal responsibilities among other family members, leading to enhanced training for Prince Charles, Prince William, and other working royals. The adaptation process demonstrated the resilience of the signal system while highlighting its dependence on the skills and experience of individual family members. Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee celebrations in 2022 provided opportunities to demonstrate the continued effectiveness of royal dining signal communication despite the challenges of recent years. The series of dinners and receptions with foreign leaders showcased the monarchy's diplomatic capabilities while celebrating 70 years of her reign. The most significant diplomatic dinner occurred with G7 leaders who attended the Jubilee celebrations. The dinner required coordinating complex international discussions about global economic challenges, security concerns, and cooperation frameworks while maintaining the celebratory atmosphere appropriate for the Jubilee. Queen Elizabeth II used the full range of traditional and modern signals throughout the evening to facilitate discussions about international cooperation while ensuring that all attending leaders felt appropriately honored and included in the celebration. Her signal coordination with other family members demonstrated the sophisticated teamwork that the system enabled when properly executed. The dinner achieved significant diplomatic progress on various international issues while maintaining the joyful atmosphere that made the Jubilee celebrations memorable for all participants. Foreign leaders later credited the evening with strengthening personal relationships and international cooperation frameworks that continued to influence global politics for years afterward.